All right, everybody, welcome back to Icons, Influencers, and Inspirations. My name is Sandy Cerami. Excited as hell today to have a very special guest, somebody that I've gotten to know over the course of the last year and a half, made an immediate impression upon me just because of the way not only he carries himself, but the way he thinks, the way he posits things in such a way that is really counterintuitive to what most people think about these days. He always brings a fresh and different perspective than the same old, same old. So I want to bring on my man, Mr. David Spisak. David, welcome to Icons.
Thanks so much, Sandy. Thank you for having me.
I appreciate it, my friend. I think, truthfully, David, you check all three of the boxes. And we talk about icons, influencers, and inspirations. For me, for sure, and I know a lot of other folks out there, you check all three boxes. And you and I have gotten a chance to know each other because of our mutual friend, Scott Joseph. We've had a myriad number of mutual connections over the years. Your story is amazing to me, so I want to, get into that a little bit. But before we do, let's talk a little bit about today. What David Spisak is all about today. What does life look like for you, your family? What does an average day look like? Talk a little bit about what life is like for David Spisak these days.
In a word, busy. It is. I don't know any other way, Sandy, but to be busy. I am I think of myself as a lifetime white belt, as the worker bee, as that ant digging through the hill. I don't know any other way. One thing that has allowed me, I'm sure, to experience some level of success is the fact that long ago I fell in love with the grind and the journey and the hustle, not the stuff and the prizes, and the things that most people will think about when they set a goal. And so when you ask me about a typical day, it's busy. My wife and we've got a 6-year-old and a 7-year-old, Jagger and Jackson, respectively. And I always refer to them as my Category 4 tornado and my Category 5 hurricane, that they have 2 speeds, man. They just have all in and asleep. That's it. And I think that's a little bit reflective of how we are. So it's busy. So we typically get up at 5 a.m., start out by working out. First thing, getting a sweat on. Just feels good to sweat. It feels good at 62 after being a weekend warrior for decades and doing a pretty good job at destroying my body, and not really understanding back when I was 20s and 30s how to take care of it the way we've learned how to do it today. I just feel really good being able to move and being able to get on the Peloton bike or the tread or a rower or do something, plyometrics, do anything just to get the blood going. It just kind of shakes you up and wakes you up. But the other thing it does, it frankly gives you a dose of I think, self-esteem or confidence just right off the bat in the morning, just knowing that you did that and it's in the books. From there, I tend to sit down and just read a bit, typically for a half an hour to an hour, to get kind of caught up with what's going on in the industry, get caught up with some emails, things of that nature. I've already planned my day the night before. That's really important to note. Yep. The morning is not the time to plan your day, because by the time you jump on your proverbial treadmill at work, it's already going 10 miles an hour and you're just trying to keep up. So I do that the night before. And so by the time I get done with that, it's time to jump in. Typically my first meetings in the day are starting at 7 a.m. And I do business across multiple time zones, as a lot of people do these days. So everywhere from Spain, and I've got a development team who's the most amazing group of people in the Ukraine. I've learned so much from them, and they're just such impressive human beings. I'm very fortunate to have them on the team, but I've got clients from Hawaii to New York, and a couple of international as well. So I tend to have a relatively long day, but here's the beauty. If you're doing what you love to do, if anybody harkens back to when they were a kid, and whether you were in love with playing G.I. Joe or Barbies or Army Men or Hot Wheels or whatever it was, whatever you were into at that time, we all remember the time that our parents said, hey, come to dinner, come to lunch, come here. And we just begged them for 5 more minutes. Can I have 5 more?
5 more minutes. Yeah.
5 more minutes, just 5 more minutes. I'm like that today, Sandy. And I'm happy to say that I've been doing what I love to do for decades now. And that also I have found to be a key. So get up early, work out, get my mind ready, take in some knowledge, assimilate a few things, jump into my first meetings, and it's go time from there.
You know, David, you reference the need at this point because we've got a global economy and you're touching so many different parts of the world, so many different time zones, and you've got to be flexible in terms of how you allot your time in order to accommodate, obviously, the other parties, if you will. Do you find that there's a point in time throughout the course of the day where you're most productive? Is morning time most productive for you? Do you find yourself later on in the day? Where do you see your most productive moments, and why do you think that's the case? I'm curious.
It's a great question. I think it can vary, obviously, for many people, but I think for a lot of us, your most productive times will be in the morning,
Yeah.
when your brain is bright and shiny and it hasn't gotten kind of bogged down with um, noise, data, information, meetings,
Hmm.
expectations that you have for yourself. Um, just things that are on your list that you got to get done. So for me, when I start out, I'd say from 7 to noon, 7 to 1 is probably like the high point in terms of efficiency and productivity. The afternoon's interesting. I find that for whatever the reason, well, I'll start here. I'm on the West Coast, Sandy. A lot of my clients are on the East Coast.
Right.
And so by the time I get to 2 o'clock, I don't find and it's interesting to me, when I ask people, hey, what time do you want to meet? Get on a call or get onto a Zoom call. It's very rarely that anybody goes beyond 1 p.m. or 2 p.m.
Right.
And it's interesting. And I think obviously they're getting towards the end of their day, they're wrapping up. And so that actually works out fine because then clients I have in Hawaii or the West Coast, Mountain Time, and in those time zones, it really frees me up to focus there. And that's another thing that I've learned over the years is I try to stay in concert with those time zones so that they're not conflicting. So the East Coast time zones, or when you go international, I tend to go very early in the morning, 5 a.m., 6 a.m., 7 a.m., get those out of the way. East Coasters, think about that. If I want to hit them at their most productive time, those are typically going to be somewhere in the neighborhood of 7 a.m. and 10 a.m. And so that's when the majority of those meetings happen. But I tend to stay pretty highly productive, mostly in those morning hours.
Yeah, I think it works out well, for you, just in terms of where you are geographically, and how it fits into your schedule. I've noticed, and I can't speak for you, but I can tell you that for me, over the course of the last 10 to 12 years, I've noticed that that's changed for me. I've become far more productive in the morning than I am later on in the day. I think a lot of it is taking in so much information and investing so much time. I love to connect with people, so that requires a lot of energy, a lot of focus, a lot of listening skills. And so I find myself most productive in the mornings as well. And I think a lot of people have to kind of find their sweet spot. I don't want to be age discriminatory, but I noticed that as I've gotten older, that I'm better earlier in the day and I can better serve clients earlier in the day. But I also have to adjust to West Coast because I'm on the East Coast, to West Coast clients and their calendar as well. And so you've got to be able to, I think, adjust accordingly in order to properly serve and effectively serve.
Yeah, I think at the end of I think when it's all said and done for all of us, we have to have that time to focus on, dedicate to information, investigation, exploration, those times, implementation. And then the other period of time you have to be able to dedicate to execution, right?
Absolutely.
Monitoring, measuring, executing, things of that nature. And you've got to be able to have both as you go through each day, or you're going to find, I think, that you're going to fall short or get out of balance very quickly. So I think that that's an important thing to keep in mind. I used to stay up so late, Sandy. I mean, by nature, I am the proverbial night owl. I mean, my DNA is
David,
to
I'm going to ask you this question. Were you a hellion growing up in your 20s and 30s? Were you a guy that was
no.
hard work and hard play?
Oh, well, hard work, all in,
Right.
100%. But I grew up very early. I think, I had to grow up earlier than average because I didn't have the experience or the benefit of what would be termed a normal childhood, where you
Right.
get
It was not Leave It to Beaver in your household.
no, you don't. There wasn't much time to be a kid. I think
Mm.
I was able to be a kid until I was probably about maybe 7 years old,
Hmm.
8 years old, maybe at best. And then it was growing up really, really fast because you had to, because of
Hmm.
circumstances. And that kind of continued on, through high school. And then I went into the service, and you grow up, continue to grow up really fast. Your
Right.
mama's not at, your mama's not going to show up at boot
There's
camp,
no
right?
warm, cozy place to
Tuck
retire
you in.
to in the
Yeah.
service.
Nobody's tucking you into bed in boot camp. And then by the time I got out, the combination of having to grow up early as a child and getting just a massive dose of accountability and responsibility, um, I mean, being indoctrinated into that, those belief systems and those attributes in a big way in the service. By the time I got out of the service, man, I was probably 45 years old in terms of
Hmm.
my brain.
Yep.
And I think it was, let me just think about this for a second. Uh, I got I got married probably, I think it was roughly within a year and a half of getting out of the service.
Hmm.
I had a baby within 2 years of getting out of the service. So I was, needed by the age of 23, I had to be a full on adult,
Yeah.
like a lot of people have to be. Um, and at that point, I fell into a job in the car business, and I was all in there. So I was working 60, 70 hours a week, and I really didn't know any other way. But to be completely honest, I liked it. If I didn't like it, it would have been different, but I
Hmm.
liked it. So, and I think that, as I think about it now, when you work those long hours in the car business and you get done at 10 o'clock at night, you get home at 10:30 or 11 o'clock, that certainly supported, or was in sync with the fact that I was somebody who typically stayed up till at least 1 in the morning every single night. It was very hard for me to kind of wind down, to come
Hmm.
down. And but you had to pop up the next day to, go up and do it again, or to be dad and
Right.
do what you had to do on the home front.
Yeah, no, and I listen. I'm a big fan of your podcast. So I want to plug it right now. The David Spisak Show.
Thank you.
For any of our audience that has not had a chance to catch it, you need to catch the David Spisak Show because I think that your content is outstanding. You talk about insane curiosity and conversations that just lead to breakthroughs. You had Diana Lee of Constellation on recently, and the two of you talked about how you grew up and the similarities that you both had experienced growing up and how it shaped you. And I think that speaks to exactly what you're talking about. Coming out of the service, getting married so young, having a child at such a young age, you were already preconditioned based on how you grew up to take care of people. You had a responsibility to, I think, take care of your older and younger siblings, if I'm not mistaken, correct?
That's true. When you find yourself in circumstances in life, regardless of age, that demand certain responses, what's really interesting to me is that in the moment, you are really just reacting and responding.
Hmm.
You're not necessarily in that moment taking the time to really understand or try to determine what the implications of that response or that particular situation, how is that going to shape you a year, 2 years, 5 years from now? And so even when we go through things in life that are incredibly difficult, challenging, terrible, hard,
Hmm.
in the moment, the reality is that more times than not, it's going to shape us and forge us in a way that's going to allow us to frankly do better, to be happier, to be more resilient, to be stronger, to be more innovative, to be more creative, because you have to. And so many of the times those things happen, it does turn out that they're a blessing in disguise. And I've come to the realization, or the belief, I should say, Sandy, that children that have an incredibly hard time growing up, frankly, I believe are predisposed to have a much better life and to be better equipped to handle the ups and downs of life than somebody who never had to face adversity through their entire childhood.
I would agree with you 1,000%, David. The one a thought that I would add to that is that, and you talked about it with Diana as well, when you talked about, and I've heard you talk about this in multiple different podcasts, where you could have two people or multiple people growing up in the same household under similar conditions, yet have completely different outlooks and pursue completely different paths in life. And so I want to talk a little bit about that, because while you looked at the survival mechanism, which was I've got to, get through the day, I've got to do the things I need to do in order to quote unquote survive, set you up to thrive later on in life. That's not always the case. There are, literally tens of millions of stories, if not hundreds of millions of stories in history where people did not respond the way that you did, and those that have achieved incredible success. What do you think it is that is the differentiation piece that determines that? You talk about the ifs and the whens all the time, right? I've heard that multiple times, which I love. It's such a great way of framing people and what they can achieve and what they have a possibility or a destiny for. Talk about that.
Well, for anybody who hasn't heard me talk about those terms before, I believe that you can categorize everybody in this world who's trying to pursue something into one of two categories, an if or a when, right? An if is somebody that you meet, that you size them up, you hear their story, you listen to them, you observe their attitude, their prevailing attitudes, their outlook. You observe their level of discipline, commitment, energy, focus. And you can sit there and you literally can say, okay, well, is this person an if or a when? Meaning, if you categorize them as an if, there's kind of a 50-50 chance that they're going to make it. Not necessarily make it in life, but in terms of making it to whatever goal objective they happen to have at that particular time. A when is, as implied, somebody who there's little doubt they're going to get there. It's simply a matter of when. Now, here's what's interesting. You think that all you have to do is become a when, right? And that's going to be transformative. And
Right.
to a great degree, it is transformative, because when you go from an if to a when, that only happens when you are really leveling up some of the most important attributes in success. When you look at people that are successful, they are committed, they are disciplined, they are focused, they are self-actualizing, right? They do fall in love with the grind. There's a lot of things in there that are great. But when you get to be a when, now it's a matter of, okay, these people, there's no doubt they should make it. The question is, will they? And what is that going to be dependent on is going to be, do they have now, can they activate two other important attributes, patience and perseverance?
Yeah.
Right? Do they have a relentless nature? Give me somebody who's a when, who has a relentless nature, and now they're a lock. So you're going to go from an if to a when to a lock. And
Yep.
you become a lock when you add those additional attributes in there. So I think that it's very interesting. I've always said there's only two reasons that any of us cannot accomplish literally anything we want to accomplish. It's either a lack of will or it's a lack of ability. And if it's a lack of ability, you coach, you train, you get a coach rather, or you train, you study, you learn, you assimilate more knowledge. You do the things that you need to do to improve yourself in whatever way you need to do that. If it's a lack of will, that's a completely different situation. Now, so let's go back and talk about the ifs. What's the difference between an if and a when? One of the most dominant ones, or pronounced ones, I should say, in my estimation, is just self-belief. It's just that. There's a psychological term called self-efficacy, and self-efficacy simply means it's the belief that you have in your ability to bring something about. And the reality is, self-efficacy is going to dictate whether you are going to pursue something or not. And I've been working with over 3,500 entrepreneurs, solopreneurs, salespeople, real estate agents, business people over the course of the last year alone. And when I look at this group of incredibly bright, talented, smart, experienced people, some of them are going to achieve levels up here, and some of them in the same period of time are still struggling. They're stuck, they plateau. Just like when you work out and you're trying to lose weight, I recently lost relatively quickly about 10, 11 pounds. And I thought, okay, I'm motoring, I need to do another 10. And then it just flattened out.
Yep.
And as we know, when you work out, your body starts to adjust. And as you work out and you start to lose weight, start to tone up, you're going to have to change your regimen. You're going to have to change your approach. You're going to have to start, maybe you're moving from cardio to plyometrics. Maybe you're going from plyometrics to heavy weights to kettlebells. Maybe you're going from that to something else. And it's the same way in life. So a lot of people, it's not that they don't have the capabilities, Sandy. I think that they oftentimes either cannot get out of their own way, number one. Number two, at the end of the day, they have to face the reality that they had enough belief to get here. That's it. But they don't have the level of belief to think they could go from, say, 50 to 100, 100 to
Right.
$500,000 to 10 million. And it's interesting. So some people will hit that ceiling at $35,000, $40,000. Some people will hit that ceiling at $2 million. And they're like, they did great. They hit the $1 million, which is very difficult to do, that first million. But then they stopped. They didn't see themselves. And I'll tell you where that plays out. You see people start companies that we hear of in the news. And they started a company and it did really well. And then they got fired from their own company. They ended up getting a board of directors, and the board of directors fired them. And the typical reason they fired them is they simply don't have what it takes to move that company forward from wherever it is. And maybe it's $100 million company. And you go, well, geez, what's wrong with that? Well, I'll tell you what's wrong with that. The investors that came in maybe at 100 million kind of want to see it go up to 300 million, 500 million, $1 billion. That's how they make their money. They're not okay with 100 million. It's not good enough anymore. So that's where I think it tends to be a challenge is, do you have the ability to continue to increase the level of belief that you have in yourself, in your abilities to bring something about? Mm-hmm. So that's what typically, to me, separates the if from the when.
No, it's such a great point. We talk about belief systems, right? And a lot of times that is self-limiting beliefs. Ultimately, you talked before about folks having the persistence piece and the perseverance, and you also mentioned the word urgency, right? So we talk about that very often. Where I think you have to have that perfect blend, if you will, of that balance, is a word you used before, of a daily sense of urgency to grind it out, to do the little things that are necessary, that you need to repeat each and every day, each and every week, each and every month, and then allow yourself the patience, that almost like that 1,000-year thinking of the Chinese that they talk about all the time, to allow the results to catch up with all of those little things that you've been doing over time. And I think where people very often get lost is they don't see the result as quickly as they would have expected. And then they start to either slow down or stop altogether the things that are going to drive them towards that ultimate goal of the success that they seek. And so they lose momentum, something that we talk about a lot. Big momentum, I think, loves to get fed. I use an analogy of Clifford the Big Red Dog. And you've got a couple little guys at home. They probably know who Clifford the Big Red Dog is. But big momentum is no different. It likes to get fed. And so I think, taking the time to understand and see those little things adding up over time, the compound effect, as Darren already says, or the slight edge, another great book, having the patience to allow the results to catch up with your efforts. Another thing you talk about, David, which I find so fascinating, is you talk about curiosity, you talk about counterintuition, you talk about rule breakers, you talk about people that have really achieved wild success as innovators. Talk a little bit about the good side of breaking the rules, and then also what to avoid in terms of breaking the rules, because there's a difference. There's great rule breakers out there, and there are ones that get that all wrong and think about breaking any rule is okay.
Yeah, let me start with this. I'm going to go back. I'm going to hit a couple things. First of all, I think one of the greatest superpowers any human can possess is curiosity. I've really come to know that
Amen.
the older that
Amen.
I get. Um, you know, a superfood is classified as a superfood because it has the ability to do not one thing. Like sometimes they say, well, if you eat this, it will improve this. If it eats this, it supports this.
Hmm.
But then you have other foods, that are very high up, say kale, for example, that somebody will eat that and it does a multitude of things, hence
Hmm.
creating the term superfood. So I think that curiosity is a superpower for the same reason. First and foremost, curiosity and arrogance can't live in the same human.
Amen.
Okay. So there's three things I have no time or tolerance for. One is arrogance, one is politics, and one is manipulation.
Hmm.
I don't see any benefit in the three. I don't know of anybody, regardless of what they've achieved in life, that would give them license, in my opinion, to take on one or more of those and to start engaging in them. Now, you take somebody like Elon Musk. Somebody may perceive him as being arrogant, and perhaps he is a bit. So, at a third of $1 trillion, maybe that guy's earned a little bit of a license
I would think so.
to have some degree of arrogance.
A little bit,
Um,
just a
but
little bit,
but
David.
but I really don't think at the core of him he is, and I'll tell you that because if he was, he would have co-founded PayPal and stopped.
Hmm.
He would have co-founded Tesla and stopped, Solar City and stopped, SpaceX and stopped, the Boring Company and stopped. He's not stopping. And by the way, for anybody listening, it's not the money. For everybody that's out there that says, well, how much money does this guy need? He doesn't need any. Honestly, here's the interesting thing. The truth is that guy doesn't need any money. He owns no possessions. He has no assets. He doesn't have a home. He doesn't care about those things. And the truth is, it was never about the money. It was about the pursuit. It was about the journey. It was about the accomplishment. And then clearly, this guy has got an insane level of curiosity, right? And he's bolting that together with a pretty insane level of belief. This dude literally believes he's going to have an inhabitant at some point on the planet
On
of
Mars.
Mars,
Yep.
right? And it's for that reason that he lives in what's referred to as a tiny home. That's a prefabricated home that can be put up very quickly. It's 400 square feet in the middle of nowhere on SpaceX property. That's 45 minutes, a 45-minute drive from the closest civilization.
Right.
And he's doing that because he wants to replicate what would it be like to live on Mars, to go outside and there's literally nothing there. And he doesn't imagine homes with white picket fences and high-rise condos. He imagines it's very utilitarian, right? So insane curiosity is powerful because it will keep you from being arrogant. Second thing you mentioned earlier, it gives you this insane thirst for knowledge, right? This just really genuine, not, hey, I want to know so I could prove that I'm right on something. No, like I just need to know. And the more that you are able to go out there and accumulate more and more knowledge is power, provided you add activity, some kind of action to it. But that's a big one as well. So curiosity is a big deal, Sandy, in the mix there. And then what was the other thing you were
Well, I
touching on?
talked about counterintuition
Oh,
and rule breakers.
counterintuitive thinking. I came to really love, to understand and fall in love with counterintuitive thinking, in my, really, I would say it was in my late 20s and in my early 30s, because I started challenging traditional thinking. And the reason being, the basis for that is if I followed traditional thinking, I was going to get a traditional outcome. And a traditional outcome could otherwise be known as average, right? So, for example, hey, go get a good job so you could live a comfortable life. Why would
One of the
anybody
greatest
want a
myths ever
comfortable life?
perpetrated on the American public, by the way, David.
Absolute utter bullshit. Why would you want a comfortable life? There's no glory in comfortable, right? Name name one of the world's greatest athletes, that you could think of that's living a couple. Can you
Not
just
today.
imagine, one of those great, I'm sure Michael Phelps is sitting around eating a few bags of hot Cheetos on a couch. He probably did that every day for 15 years as he was pursuing those 20 something gold medals. No, he lived an uncomfortable childhood. He started swimming at 7. I had the pleasure of meeting his sisters, Whitney and Hillary, years and years and years ago. And so really getting to understand some things about Michael, but to really understand where they came from. They came from his sisters. They came from his mom.
Mm-hmm.
But he lived an uncomfortable life, right? That created an extraordinary outcome. So that's counterintuitive. Another one is, you grow up being told, don't be selfish, don't be selfish, don't be selfish. And I kind of feel like Andy Rooney should have stepped in the room and said, here's the rest of the story.
Right.
Okay. Yes, your parents said, don't be selfish. However, there's no chance of getting to the best version of yourself without taking time for yourself.
Absolutely.
So is it selfish if you are doing something for yourself with the intention of creating the best version of yourself so that you can give the best version of yourself to your family, to your husband, to your wife, to your partner, to your kids, to your community, to your job, to your employees? No, it's not. So that was a lie, right? Another one is, hey, you need balance in life. Whoever came up with that one, what a crock that is.
Well, David, I think when you talk about balance, most people think it's got to be 50-50, right? And that's not what true balance is in the real world.
No, and the reality is balance by definition says you have to counter, right? You have to counteract one thing to achieve balance overall. Well, okay. Well, if you're one of the 73% of people in the world who doesn't like what they do for a living, is dissatisfied, is unhappy, is unfulfilled, you're going to counterbalance it by screaming, thank God it's Friday, around 4 or 5 o'clock on a Friday. You're going to go meet up with all your friends. You're going to go have a few drinks. Nothing wrong with that. Have a great time. Or you're going to go out with friends that night, Friday night, or you're going to have big plans to maybe go kayak or something that's going to counteract the things you don't like. Yep. But what if you're living a fulfilled life? What if you're an entrepreneur who's doing what you love to do? What if you're happy for the majority of that week? Do you want to am I supposed to counteract that with something I don't like to teach myself a lesson? No, it doesn't make any sense, right? So there's a lot of things in life to where counterintuitive thinking is not only worth considering, I think that it's actually vital. And there was a great Seinfeld episode with George Costanza sitting in the booth in the diner, and some really beautiful woman turned around and was looking at him, and Elaine, the character, says, hey, that woman is looking at you. Why don't you go say hi? And he goes, no, I couldn't possibly say hi. And Jerry says, well, if everything you've been doing in your life is wrong, do the opposite. Yep. And you see George literally have an epiphany. He says, yes, I will do the opposite.
Just a snap of the fingers, right? Yes.
And for the rest of that episode, the guy's like a superhuman. Everything he does is
one of my favorite Seinfeld episodes, by the way.
Right? So counterintuitive thinking, I think, is absolutely brilliant. And at the end of the day, listen, I tell this to companies all the time. I tell it to leaders. I tell it to people. Take an assessment, take inventory of where you are right now, right here, right now, as you're listening to this. And if it's not where you want to be, whatever plan you're using that got you here, give it a kiss, say thank you, and throw it in the trash, because that's where it belongs. It's done as much as it's going to do. And you need to get a different plan. And so if you're thinking as an extension of that has always brought you to the circumstance you're in now, why not explore, look into, and start activating counterintuitive thinking? And here's the thing. The next time anybody hears something and they find themselves leaning back in the chair or crossing their arms or mentally pushing back, saying that's absolute baloney, that's BS, that's never going to work, Write it
Lean in.
down and make a commitment to lean in, because
Absolutely.
there is your gateway to greatness.
I so love the thread of this conversation and where you just went. And I'll reference Seinfeld because it's one of my favorite shows of all time. You know, you talked about the fact that, you know, it's okay if you want to be, well, I'm going to use the F and F and the S and S. A lot of folks in this world have been sold on the myth that if you are safe and secure, you're going to be happy. And the truth of the matter is when you're free and fulfilled is when you really experience true happiness in your life. And so if you want to be safe and secure, that's okay. To quote Seinfeld, I'll say, not that there's anything wrong with that, right?
That's right.
But the truth of the matter is true happiness in my experience. And when I watch people like you, and I am a wildly curious student of people just like yourself, people like Grant Cardone, people that have achieved incredible success by doing what other people won't do. You talk about it as the uncommon, which I love, right? As you talk about as the uncommon folks that are out there, the uncommon actions and activities that they are involved in, that they commit to. And it's so contrarian to what everybody else believes is the right path to pursue. And a lot of it is just conditioning, right? It's what they see and hear or have seen and heard for decades.
It's almost all conditioning. And
yeah,
you know, you could be conditioned externally, you know, friends, family. I mean, there's a lot of people out there that their friends are not helping them. I'll just say it that way. Okay. And I'm not
family
saying
too, David. It's not just friends. Family too that are sitting there and constructing limiting beliefs on their behalf.
Well, the reality is, you know, it's funny. You know, there's three subjects you're not supposed to talk about, right? Politics, they say, and religion is one, and sex is another. But you know, you're not supposed to walk around the world. You could have whatever level of faith you have in your religion, but it tends to be a quiet belief. The minute that you start going out and trying to blister other people with your belief systems from a religious perspective, you're going to notice people are going to start backing away from you, right? And but yet, when we have people in our lives inflict upon us their belief systems, their limiting beliefs, and they do it oftentimes under the premise that they're trying to protect you.
Yes.
But here's the reality. They are protecting you. They're protecting you from your best life ever. Right. They're protecting you from happiness. Yes. They're protecting you from wealth. They're protecting you from wild levels of success because they don't have, you remember that self-actualization or the self-efficacy? Absolutely. Their self-efficacy, they transfer to you. And so if they have a level of self-efficacy that doesn't allow them to pursue certain things, to be completely free to pursue anything, they're going to share, you know, their beliefs. And what they're really doing is they're doing a transference of self-efficacy
absolutely
to you. And once you own
they're projecting, they're projecting.
That's it. You have to choose. You have to remember this, no matter what you hear in your life, from the time you're a kid to the time you die, okay? If somebody says anything about you that characterizes you, or they say this is possible, that's not possible, whatever, you have a choice to sanction that remark or not. And the reality is, as a kid, we didn't know any better. We thought, we were told, hey, listen to your elders.
Right.
Well, what if the elder was an idiot? What if the elder, you know, didn't accomplish a damn thing in their life? What if the elder, you know, was constantly getting in trouble? What if the elder was constantly in trouble with the law? Oh, I got to listen to my elders. Okay, so we do that. Okay, what if the elder was actually a very fine human being, but had incredibly limiting beliefs to him? What if the elder was a teacher in middle school or high school? Well, they got a diploma on their wall. They must be smart. I should listen to that person. Well, maybe you should listen to them when it comes to social studies, but not in terms of your beliefs of what is possible. And in fact, I recently had a podcast with a gentleman named Marcus Harvey, remarkable guy, 32 years old, from the Portland area. I met him about 5-6 years ago, started a company called Portland Gear.
I saw that. Yep.
And he's literally, he has the Instagram handle Portland, and he literally in a city that as you know, has been mischaracterized oftentimes in the last year, 2 years. And it's really full of some really incredible people. It's a stunningly beautiful place. There's a lot of good things about it. But he literally changed the face of it. He changed the personality. He changed people's sense of pride, just like people that wear a New York Yankee hat,
Mhm.
or God forbid, a Dodger hat. I'm a Giants fan. Sorry,
Yeah,
Dodger
I
fans.
know.
But he changed it. And where did that come from? It came from a teacher that he had that gave him the reins of the student store. And he woke up at the age of 18, learning that he actually had the ability to run a business, that he loved clothing, and all that is what fueled that. So if you're fortunate enough to have that, and this is why Jim Rohn says the 5 people you surround yourself with is so
Absolutely.
critical, because if those are the 5 people, one of his 5 people was his mother and his father, who let him be, who let him chase what he wanted to chase.
Yep.
Another one, the third one, was this teacher in high school. Well, he had 5 people that fueled him without ever knowing that that was a dynamic that even was possible or existed. So as a kid, you didn't know that. As an adult, you do. The question is, will you do something about it? And that's, to me, one of the toughest things, Sandy, is I find the other thing, other than belief, self-belief, people struggle with the concept of being brutally honest with themselves.
Oh my God! You're in my head right now because I wanted to let you finish that thought because you're speaking absolute gems right now, and I'm so excited for the audience to have a chance to sit and really digest this episode and listen to it multiple times, because you're going to go back and hear so much that David has shared with us. David, you talk about Jim Rohn, right? So
One of my all-time favorites.
he's my number one all time. I was introduced to him because I was involved in a network marketing business 12 years ago, when I was literally, I needed money like I needed oxygen. We had gone through the GM bankruptcy proceeding. Mary and I had lost everything. We were, 1.4 million upside down. And I just needed a way to generate income to feed my family, quite honestly. And I got introduced to Jim Rohn by a friend of mine, Joe Barricata. Changed my life. Changed my life because you talk about that level of curiosity. I've always had it. But what that led me to was to learn about who mentored Jim Rohn, who was J. Earl Schoaf, who they called the millionaire maker back in the early part of the 20th century, who mentored, by the way, not just Jim Rohn, he mentored Zig Ziglar and another very successful person, Mary Kay Ash, or Mary Kay Cosmetics, as most people, the pink Cadillacs, they'll be able to recall. But that level of curiosity and making certain that you surround yourself with the types of people that aren't going to put you in that prison of self-limiting beliefs is critical. They don't even have to be alive and kicking. They can be somebody that has recorded content that you can go back and reference. But ultimately, sometimes it's less conspicuous and sometimes even more pernicious than just people trying to save you or keep you, from harm, if you will, or because if they've not experienced success at the level that you seek. It's like the crabs in the bucket. They're pulling you down because they don't necessarily want to see you achieve something that they didn't have either the guts or the will to go after.
It's a really important, it's a really important thing to bring up. And I don't want to have it get lost with people. This is really important. The reason why I wanted to interject
Go.
is because another thing, self-belief, honesty, brutal honesty with yourself. And the third
Self-awareness, David.
And the third thing is guts. And I'll tell you why. Growing takes guts. Elevating takes guts. People think, oh, I see somebody in Instagram, and so many of the people on Instagram are pretenders, they're posers, they're human highlight reels. They're not being honest in terms of what their whole life is. And
Absolutely.
hey, that's their thing. They're trying to get likes. I get it. It's fine. But you shouldn't get lost in that. And the thing is that behind the scenes, if you talk to anybody who's achieved anything at all in their life, that's great. It took guts. And one of the toughest things is to understand that as you elevate in life, your friends are going to change. You're going to have people that were in your circle of friends here that when you elevate it, it's almost like some of them are not okay with it. Some of them maybe have a level of jealousy or a level
Yes.
of discomfort in it. And so, or they don't want you to grow any higher because maybe they know inherently it will change the dynamic of the relationship. But I promise you, if you look at anybody at the highest levels of success right now, they do not have the friends that they had 5 years ago or 10 years ago or longer. It takes guts. It's lonely sometimes. And that's why it does take perseverance. That's why it takes a relentless, you have to have that attribute of relentlessness in order to be able to stay in it. And so that's something that you're bringing up that I just want to make sure that people understand. If you want greatness, guts has got to come along for the ride.
I couldn't agree more. You talked about in one of your podcast episodes the fact that the most successful people in the world actually chase failure. Okay,
They do. They pursue
and that's
it.
a fact. And
It's interesting. Most people, I hate to use percentages, but if you want to talk about, people always talk about the 97% and the 3% and the 99% and the 1%. The 1% steer into the storm. The 1% pursue failure. They know what's on the other side. They get it. Okay. The 97% will not only not do that, they will actually avoid it, not understanding that by avoiding failure, you're avoiding success.
Absolutely. My right-hand guy, Ron Marvo, who you know, talks about it all the time. He is a great guy. He's a unicorn. I tell him all the time. He's my link to relevancy for the next 15 to 20 years because he's, 20 years my younger. But he's got just this old soul and old intelligence and an old emotional EQ that most people his age don't have or haven't developed yet. But he talks about what you just said all the time. It's so here's the thing. Most people want to hear you've got to have guts and you've got to be quote unquote fearless and relentless. They're picturing like Jocko Willing putting a hunting knife in his teeth and swimming across the bay at night, with shark-infested waters to go save someone. That's not what you're talking about with respect to having guts. Having guts is knowing that you've got that feeling inside of you where you're like, I'm not really too sure this is going to work out. Like, holy shit, what if it doesn't? What's going to happen? The folks that are willing to take that risk have calculated the level of risk that they're going to be involved in. They know that they have the risk of failure, but they still go after it knowing that what's on the other side is going to be growth and going to be an opportunity to pivot if they have to, or make an adjustment to continue that relentless pursuit of what they are seeking to achieve in the first place.
So here's I think potentially a secret, something very important, especially if you're an entrepreneur, you're trying to go out there and grow a company and ultimately raise capital. So what you just talked about is the fact that, at some point you're going to run into things that require guts. And if it requires guts, that means fear is likely an element, right? In other words, you don't need guts where fear doesn't exist. Fair? Okay. So it's not that people that achieve great things don't have that same fear. They do. The irony is they do. The difference is, again, go back to the number one thing I said, self-belief. Okay. They have belief ultimately in themselves to do one of two things. Think about this, everybody. They have the belief in themselves to either accomplish that which they are pursuing or to survive the fact that they didn't.
Yeah.
Think about that for a second, because that's also a very different way of looking at things. We typically think of things in a very traditional fashion. I have to have the guts. I have to believe I can do it or else. Okay. No, you have to have the belief that you could do it or that you could survive it. And if you have that level of belief, think about it. There's literally nothing you won't pursue. Now, here's the reason I bring it up. And I called out specifically entrepreneurs, people that ultimately want to go out and raise capital, is because if you talk to any venture capitalist, okay, they invest in companies, in products. But the number one thing, if you ask any venture capitalist they're investing in, is what? The person.
The person, the
they
founder.
Always tell me, David, we look at the team. Why do they look at the team? Because they need to make certain that they're seeing exactly what I just mentioned. If they believe, if they see that those people have provided evidence that they have that deep level of self-belief, conviction, discipline, drive, relentless nature they're going to give them the money. They're betting on the person. They're not betting on the product.
Absolutely. And I've had conversations like that a lot over the last 15 years of my life and my career. And that is absolutely spot on. It's purpose, right? It's knowing exactly why you're there and what drives you each and every day. And then having, as you said before, persistence. And we keep throwing these words around, and they're somewhat cliche because they're true, right? We hear them so very often. But the reason we hear them so very often is because we're studying those that have achieved high levels of success. And these are the common threads, personality traits, and characteristics that they all represent. You talked about Elon before. He's my favorite right now. He's the guy that I'm watching a lot and listening to a whole lot, because what he says, if you parse through what he's saying, because his intelligence is at such an incredibly high level that sometimes you have to parse through, and you have to get to the simplistic message that he's trying to deliver to you. But when you talked before about the fact that it wasn't about the money for him, he evidenced that for each and every one of us. You take a look at the level of investment he was willing to make personally. He took everything that he made in PayPal to invest in the next company, everything that he made in Solar City to create Tesla, to create all the other businesses.
He nearly went bankrupt in 2008 because his Tesla investors said, "We're done. We don't want to give you any more money." Yep. He had to feed money into Solar City. He had to feed money into SpaceX. He had to feed money into Tesla, 3 different companies to keep him afloat. But to your point, that dude is all in, baby. All in every single day. And that's another really critical attribute, is to be are you all in every single day? And again, think about it. Let's go back to self-belief. How could you be all in? I have people that say, "Oh man, I'm all in." Really? But you won't pursue this.
Yeah.
Okay. So you either are all in or you're not. You can't be all in if you don't have the self-belief to back it up. And by the way, we're coming up on the top of the hour, but there's one other thing that's so critically important. If I was to call out a 4th thing, and that's comparison. People make the mistake too often today, and social media is feeding it, to compare themselves to other people.
Sure.
With other circumstances. And it can be a fatal flaw. It's not just potentially damaging. For some people, it's fatal. I don't mean fatal in terms of it's going to kill them, but it's going to kill their ability to pursue or to achieve what they want to achieve. Mm-hmm. And it's just so important, Sandy, that, if you're going to make a comparison, when you set a goal, right? When you set a goal and you write it down and you break it down into the dailies, you've got to do all those things. Set a goal, break it down into the dailies, and then you've got to pursue the dailies. But once you have the dailies figured out, you no longer pursue the goal, you pursue the dailies. Most people pursue the goal. They say, "Oh, I want that car, I want that boat, I want that house, I want this, I want that." And they come up short more times than not. But if they just simply focus on the dailies and you don't want to focus on the goal, because even comparing current you with that future you can be damaging. Because if you don't have the level of belief and self-efficacy that you need, what's going to happen is, in your own mind, whether you want it to or not, your brain, your subconscious is going to start taking actions to protect your ego, protect your self-esteem. And the way it does that is, it's like when you watch a football player, cornerback, get beat very badly, and they end up with that loser's limp, they call it, right? All of a sudden they come up lame with my hamstring, right? After they got beat by 30 yards by a receiver. But your subconscious is so powerful and so brilliant. And like anything in life, you can learn how to leverage that for the good, positive, but left to its own devices, it's just going to do what it does, what it's programmed to do. And so that comparison game is something I would also tell people to avoid, for sure.
Listen, I talk about the 6-inch space in between our ears as either the most dangerous and deadly minefield that you can ever walk through, or the most fertile soil that you'll ever plant the seed of an idea in. And the choice is ultimately ours. And comparison using something like social media is a minefield, in my opinion. I couldn't agree with you more. There's too much of the hype and skin deep promotion that goes on as a result of social media, but it's only an amplification of society today, unfortunately. The truth of the matter is you got to have a high level of self-awareness to know who you are truly at your core. You said before, to be honest with yourself. I did an exercise back in college, and I went to college on the Blutarski Scholarship, sponsored by Anheuser-Busch. Truthfully, I did not make it through all 4 years in college. It just wasn't a place for me. But one of the best experiences I ever had with a teacher was Professor Heilmeyer, and she took me through a self-awareness exercise in a public speaking class that I took, which was life-altering. I still have the project that she graded. I got the highest grade in the class, first time and only time it ever happened for me, but it made such an impact on me. I still have it today. And Ron's probably laughing right now because I still have a copy of it, and it changed everything for me. It really forced me to be honest with myself. And I think that's what you're referring to, having the ability to be honest with yourself and then use that and leverage it to create a level of self-efficacy that drives you. All right. That gives you the opportunity to pursue everything you're talking about in life. But we are coming up on the top of the hour. I have one question that I really want to ask you, because you mentioned in one of your podcast episodes that you want to help the folks that you don't want a penny from, that you just want to help folks that don't necessarily have the means, but would need and deserve the opportunity to speak with you. And I love the fact that you do that. I think it just speaks to who you are. Here's the question I have for you. If I was to hand you a magic cell phone that you could go back and call yourself at the lowest point that you've had in your life, what would you say and how would you speak to yourself? I'm curious. What would you tell yourself?
Man, it's a really good question. I'm reminded in those times, and the first time that I managed to achieve, and it's going to sound interesting. Here's some counterintuitive for you. The first time I achieved failure, I want people to remember the way I'm phrasing that.
Mm-hmm.
I didn't experience failure. I achieved failure. and I put it as an achievement, because if failure leads to success, then why is that not equally an achievement to the success itself? So in my earliest days, when I achieved significant levels of failure, I hadn't been introduced yet to the great Zig Ziglar. I started getting exposed to Zig Ziglar probably in the 80s. I want to say early 80s, maybe, with Think and Grow Rich. With See You at the Top. Great book. First line in that book, you could get everything you want in life by helping enough other people get what they want. Brilliant. Amen. It's a law of indirect effort for anybody who's keeping score out there. That's all that is. But I had the opportunity to be around Zig on a number of occasions. And, he said something that I think is so appropriate for that question. He said, failure is an event, not a person. And so that's what I would say to that younger version of myself, is that failure is an event, not a person. In other words, you're not a failure. Okay. You failed in that particular effort, that particular pursuit. And the reality is, I'll say to that younger version of me what I say to everybody today, and that is that relentless cannot be defeated. So provided, young David, that you are relentless, that you never stop, that you never quit, that you never slow down, that you never lose your intensity, your focus, your urgency, your purpose, your intention, then you are a when and not an if. And that's really all that matters.
That is the answer that I was hoping for, just in terms of its gravity and its depth, but also in its simplicity and clarity. And that is it in a nutshell. You crystallized exactly what every person, I was going to say every young person, but every person needs to know, because even the folks that are a little more on in years as I am, you've got to hear that. And you've got to understand the message behind that message that you just shared with us. It's a great answer. I appreciate that.
Thank you.
My friend, I want to thank you. We got introduced to each other through Business Bourbon and Cigars with Scott Joseph. We have another one coming up in September, which I'm wildly looking forward to. You are one of the people that I always look forward to seeing. You always bring something different to that experience that nobody else does. And so I want to thank you for your support there and your commitment to us, because it's a commitment to the community, if you will, that we built. So I'm looking forward to seeing you for sure in September. But I want to thank you more so for being who you are, because as I've had the chance to really deep dive into your podcast, and I want to plug it again, the David Spisak Show. If you are not listening to that podcast on a regular basis, I turn my kids onto it, my wife, anybody that will listen to me, because I think that the message of the podcast is relevant and important. You need to check it out. And
can I say one thing really quick, just because
Sure.
this put the biggest smile on my face, and anybody who's a parent will relate to this. So about a month ago, we had to take our sons to a birthday party. It was about 30 minutes away. And we needed multiple cars because we were taking one of the boys had his friends with him. So we were giving them a ride. And so my older daughter, Elise, I have Fatherhood 1.0 and 2.0.
Right.
And I mentioned Jackson and Jagger. Well, I have two really extraordinary kids, Elise and Trey. Trey's 34, Elise is 38. And so Elise, when we moved to Oregon, she moved up here as well about 6 months later, because we have a very good relationship. She's very close also with my wife, and she absolutely adores her little brothers. So as always, she was stepping in to help, and she was driving my oldest back from the party. And when we got home and Jackson ran down the hallway to go play, she said, I have to tell you something. And I said, what's that? She said, well, when I got in the car and he strapped himself into a seat, I started to put the music on, and he said, can we listen to my dad's podcast?
Oh, that is
And
as good as it gets.
That's as big of a smile as I've ever had on my face. And so what was awesome about that is he started talking about it, and his little brother was around. And the next day we get in the car, the four of us, and Jagger, the little one, says, can we listen to your podcast?
Great.
And so
that's as high a praise as you ever seek as a parent.
If those are the only 2 subscribers I ever had.
No, that's not true.
I'm saying if they were the only 2.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
I'd be in heaven. I'd be good, because that's as good as it gets to be able to take anything that we've experienced or survived, learned, and be able to share that with people that we love, including our family and our kids. But to have that happen, that was, if somebody asked me a high point in my life, that's definitely one of the big high points in my life.
Yeah.
So thank you for bringing up the podcast. I love doing it. And people will notice that most of the people I interview, you've probably never heard of, but you want to know of them. And by the way, I'll say this, Sandy, I've got one this afternoon with a gentleman named Todd. I learned about him through the Business Insider articles that I read. And I learned about this extraordinary young guy. He's 29 years old, who's just doing amazing things in real estate without money. And I needed to learn more. So I reached out to him on LinkedIn. We connected on LinkedIn just a few weeks ago. And I asked him if he wanted to be on the podcast, and he's going to be on today. So I have no doubt, 29 years old, guy made $1.5 million last year, doing something that nobody, probably 95% of the people out there, have never thought was even possible. And so I think it's going to be, I want to introduce people to uncommon people doing uncommon things, living extraordinary lives. They don't have to be celebrities. They don't have to be famous in order to live a very uncommon life.
Well, I share your purpose there, because when we hatched the concept for icons, influencers, and inspirations, I very purposefully put those 3 together, because it doesn't matter whether or not everybody knows who you are. They can be influenced and inspired by you. If you happen to be an icon too, fantastic. And as I said, I put you in that category. If you check all 3 boxes, wonderful. But if you check one or two of the three, we're good. And it creates incredible content that people will not find anyplace else. And so I'm going to keep plugging your podcast because I am that much of a fan, the David Spisak Show. You're across all the different platforms that are out there, so it's easy for them to find it. They can find you at davidspisak.com, as well as all the other businesses that you're involved in terms of ownership and equity, but also in terms of advisory positions. And so I encourage people to check out David's website as well. Across the board in terms of social media. So if you are not following David Spisak on all the social media platforms, I don't know what the hell you're waiting for, but here's your invitation. Get going and follow him. David, any parting thoughts before we wrap it up here?
Well, I just first and foremost want to thank you. It's been an absolute pleasure, Sandy, to have the opportunity to meet you. I thank Scott Joseph for facilitating that. Again, here you go, law of indirect effort, right? Yep. He had asked me to come a couple times ago out to Kentucky, which is definitely not easy to get to from Portland, Oregon.
I know it because I come from the East Coast. I suffer the same malady.
But it was definitely worth the trip, and that's the reason I came back and was in Tampa a couple months ago. But one of the many benefits of that is networking, and yep. Networking is so powerful in both our personal and our professional lives because it can enhance and enrich anybody's life in so many different ways. And so it's been a pleasure to get to know you. It's a pleasure to be on here. I thank you for the invitation. Wishing you and your family and your listeners all the very best. And just, want everybody out there to take the time to put some focus on themselves, to be a little bit selfish, and to take the time to come to understand that because of your own personality traits, their personal attributes, their work experience, life experience, the people that they met, the things they've experienced and the things they've survived, they are literally one of one. They are uncommon. So I hope that they take the time to come to that realization so that they can also live an uncommon life.
Well, my friend, it's been my pleasure. It's my high honor. I'm humbled that you took the time to spend with us here today. I know that there's going to be an opportunity for folks to really take a hard listen to what you shared with us today. And as I say, I always encourage them to listen to it more than once because you'll hear something different each and every time you listen to it. But I want to thank
one of the things, Sandy, so yep. important. If you listen, whether you're listening to this podcast, you're listening to Sandy, you're listening to myself, you're listening to anybody else, if you hear something that resonates with you, go one step further, reach out to them, whether it's on Instagram. I'll clue somebody up to something I was clueless about. Mm-hmm. And that's if you DM somebody on Instagram, but you don't follow them, it goes into this black hole general mailbox that they're never going to see. Yep. So make sure you follow that person first, but reach out on LinkedIn, reach out on Clubhouse, reach out on Instagram. One of the great things about social media, it's never been easier to connect with somebody you've never met before, but somebody who you feel like you should know.
Absolutely.
So do that.
No, I couldn't agree with you more. We encourage folks always to follow our guests on the podcast properties that we run right now. As a matter of fact, it gives me an opportunity to say thank you and acknowledge our producer, Mr. Ron Marvo. He is the right-hand guy at Sandy Cerami and Associates. And so I want to thank him for putting it all together for us on the back end. He's backstage right now, and he's probably giving me a smile here because that's all this guy does is smile. He's such a unique character.
He's awesome.
He really is.
He's probably in hair and makeup right now. Yeah. The guy looks so good. He looks so good all the time. And by the way, I have to also thank Armand and Austin in my office because likewise they produce and direct. They're so incredibly talented in what they do, and so everything that anybody hears me say or do on Instagram, LinkedIn, TikTok, they're just starting on TikTok or any of the podcasts. It doesn't happen without those guys. And there's a couple other guys, Chris Peterson as well, does phenomenal work. Franklin, I'm just very blessed to be surrounded with some really talented people.
Well, it goes both ways, my friend. I mean, they have an opportunity to go tuition free and hang with David Spisak, and there's nothing wrong with that. There's only good things that come as a result of that. In the meantime, we're going to step up to stand out. I want to thank everybody for joining us here today. Please remember to give us likes, shares, comments, etc. Subscribe to the YouTube channel for more great content coming up. David, I want to thank you once again. I wish you and your family an incredible weekend, and I look forward to seeing you very soon, my friend.
Thank you. You as well. And thanks for having me on.
Thank you,
Appreciate
my
it.
friend.